If you were to travel back in time, there are several places you wouldn't want to end up. Take for example the aptly named Hell Creek Formation of the Cretaceous, where you would have run the risk of bumping into Tyrannosaurus rex. Or go back slightly earlier to the Jurassic Morrison Formation, where you'd find yourself dodging the likes of Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus. However, nestled between these two time periods lies, for my money, the deadliest place in prehistory. Located along the Morocco-Algerian border of North Africa sits a site known as the Kem Kem group, sometimes more commonly referred to as simply the Kem Kem. It's a site that is dated to around 101 to 84 million years ago, placing it during the Cenomanian and Turonian age of the Cretaceous, and has produced several fossils belonging to some of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs known. To begin with, however, the earliest finds to come from the region weren't those of dinosaurs, but in fact fish. These early finds were of fossilized scales, and it wasn't until the early 1950s that French paleontologist René Lavocat uncovered the first dinosaur fossils. Following on from this, there wasn't any new material named from the site for nearly 40 years, until in 1996, paleontologist Dale Russell described several fossils obtained from collectors in the region that belonged to some of the most famous dinosaurs ever, who we'll talk about later. But it was these early discoveries of fish scales in the Kem Kem that would paint a picture of what the paleo-environment of the group looked like. Now, for some years, the actual environment of the Kem Kem has been of some debate, but what is known for certain is that water was a major part of it. Some have said the region was a river floodplain, and others have said that it was a delta with occasional lakes dotted around. However, a mix of the two is more likely, with the consensus being that it was an environment where rivers surrounded by conifer trees would flow into the ocean. It is within these waters where you'd likely encounter the first deadly animal, known as Onchopristis. This was a fish genus that was found across Europe, North America, and Africa, with the specimens from the Kem Kem attributed to the species O. numidus. The first fossils of this genus were uncovered in 1905, but it wasn't until 1917 where they were finally named by paleontologist Ernest Stromer, who's a name that will crop up many times throughout this video. These early finds, as well as the majority of the ones found, come in the form of cartilage or denticles that are found along the animal's massive rostrum. For a fish that ranges between 6 to 13 feet long, their rostrum makes up roughly 30% of this, and the rostrum itself is covered in the aforementioned denticles, which are around 2 inches long. The shape of Onchopristis has led to confusion about its relationship to other fish, as the rostrum bears similarities to modern sawfish, which has led to several depictions showing it as essentially a larger version of this animal. However, phylogenetic analysis places them as close relatives of modern skates. The difference between Onchopristis and sawfish rostrums can be seen in the denticles yet again. Modern sawfish don't replace their denticles, and thus have ones all of similar sizes. Skates, on the other hand, replace them once they are lost, which results in denticles of all different sizes. The use of these structures and the rostrum itself is believed to aid the animal in both hunting and defense, where it'd use it to slash at prey or foes, either stunning or pinning them with it. However, there are just some fish too big to mess with, and in the waters of the Kem Kem, Onchopristis would have had many of those, such as the giant coelacanth Morsonia. The family this genus belonged to existed from the Triassic all the way until the late Cretaceous, and in that time had spread across most of the world, with multiple species living in both marine and freshwater environments. Within the waters of the Kem Kem lived multiple species such as M. lavacati and some indeterminate ones. The reason for them being indeterminate is due to the fossil evidence consisting of isolated remains such as jaw bones. Even from these isolated remains, it was clear to see that these fish were big, which was a trend seen within this genus. Now, while the species from the Kem Kem and the rest of Africa were large, the ones from across the South Atlantic were even larger, with the species M. gigas averaging lengths of 3 meters. Interestingly, this genus is a great example of allopatric speciation, where new species evolve after a barrier is formed between populations. See, before the Albion, South America and Africa were connected, with the aforementioned M. gigas existing on both continents. After this time period, the two continents split, with South America, Africa, and Morocco itself becoming isolated from one another. This led to the evolution of separate species on all three, with M. gigas remaining in South America, M. tegamenas existing across northwest Africa, and M. lavacati occupying the Kem Kem. However, it is worth pointing out that this latter species might not actually be a member of Morsonia, and may instead belong to the genus Axelrodichthyes. Regardless of what genus it belonged to, just being big probably wouldn't be enough to protect it from the predators that patrolled the waterways. Not only was the Kem Kem home to several species of shark, but also it played host to multiple genera of crocodilomorphs. One such creature was Elosuchus, a 15 to 20 meter reptile reminiscent of the modern day gharial. Found across North Africa and Great Britain, this genus has a confusing taxonomic history. Originally, the holotype specimen, a poorly preserved lower jaw of a juvenile, was assigned to the genus Thracosaurus in 1955. Later, a new genus and family was erected to encompass this material and other species. But another twist to the tale was added in 2017 when the holotype mentioned earlier, belonging to the species E. felixi, was moved to the genus Fortegnathus. This left Elosuchus with two species, E. broine and E. cherryfiensis, with the latter being the one known from the Kem Kem, both of which are poorly understood. What is understood is that this species was a heterodont, meaning that it has multiple different shapes of teeth, with the front teeth being conical in shape and designed for gripping, and the back teeth being serrated in shape and designed for slashing. The difference in teeth showed us that Elosuchus probably performed a similar feeding style to modern day Nile crocodiles, biting down on prey before swallowing. But patrolling the waters alongside it were other crocodilomorphs, such as Aegisuchus, a flat-snouted crocodilomorph whose holotype, a partial brain case, was uncovered in the Kem Kem. Based on the size of this holotype material, it was estimated that Aegisuchus was very large, sitting at anywhere from 15 to 22 meters long, making it larger than other notable crocodilomorphs such as Deinosuchus and Sarcosuchus. Although it should be stated that the higher end of this range has been suggested to be an overestimate. Alongside this size, Aegisuchus also has another unique characteristic, a bony boss located on the top of the skull. This structure consists of a rough surface surrounded by deep grooves, which are thought to have housed blood vessels. The purpose of this structure is still debated. Some say that it may be for thermoregulatory purposes. However, the current idea is that it may instead be for display purposes. Modern crocodiles and alligators perform territorial displays by raising their heads out of the water. This, along with the display structure, led to the idea that Aegisuchus would raise its head out of the water in a similar manner, and flush blood to this structure, forming an eye spot shape to ward off rivals. But the water wasn't the only place that these creatures would occupy, for on land there was a crocodilomorph called Eryprosuchus ratoides, or as I'm now going to call it, the rat croc. This meter-long animal was discovered in 1990, and the material attributed to it consists of a right lower jaw that preserves a unique first tooth that points forward. It is this feature that gave the species its name, as they thought the tooth resembled that of modern rats. This tooth has made it difficult to decide what this animal fed on, as wear patterns indicate that it might have fed on insects, whereas other papers say it may have been herbivorous. Whatever it fed on, it's clear this species was adapted to life out of the water, as when compared to other crocodile relatives, it has longer limb bones and metacarpals, resulting in an upright posture. These adaptations made it a much more capable terrestrial animal as well, and for good measure, as not only would it have to evade dangers from the land, but also the air. At this point in time, the Kem Kem was a hotbed for diversity within pterosaurs, with multiple genera being named from the site. In the beginning, the first remains of these animals found at the site consisted of teeth, with the number found greatly outnumbering any other skeletal material attributed to this group. From these teeth, 4 unique shapes were identified between them, and it is believed that the different shapes allowed the multiple species to coexist, allowing them to feed on different prey items to avoid competition. For example, a genera called Anhanguera likely fed on fish. See, this pterosaur with a 4 to 5 meter long wingspan had multiple curved conical teeth within its mouth that, based on microwear analysis and shape, were likely used to catch fish. Another, more famous fish-eating pterosaur genera from the region is Ornithocheirus. Now, if that name rings a bell, that is because this animal was the star of the Walking with Dinosaurs episode, Giant of the Skies. And you may also remember that in that episode, it was stated as having a wingspan of 12 meters. This is a massive overestimate though, and probably has something to do with the fact that the creature in the episode wasn't actually Ornithocheirus, but instead Tropeognathus. In reality, the actual wingspan of Ornithocheirus was 4 to 6 meters, which is based off of fragmentary material mostly collected from the United Kingdom, with the material from the Kem Kem being even more scarce, consisting of a premaxillary. As a result, this material is only tentatively assigned to Ornithocheirus. However, if it is this genus, then like Anhanguera, it too would have also been a fish eater. In fact, this genus was well adapted to being in and around water, as this genus has reinforced shoulder joints as well as expanding musculature associated with wing movement. This meant that, whilst in the water, this genus would have been more than capable of taking off from the water, using its back legs to propel itself forward and its wings for lift, as it tries to overcome the water tension. This means it would have appeared as if the pterosaur was hopping along the water, with each hop bringing them further out of the water before they fully deployed their wings in the final stage for takeoff. Now, while smaller pterosaurs had to employ this method of takeoff when in the water, one group that didn't have to worry about it was the giant Azhdarchids, and with this being the Kem Kem, of course it had its own friendly murder stork. In fact, it had several, but one of the more well-known is Alunca saharica. With a 4 to 5 meter wingspan, this giant was the first toothless pterosaur discovered from the Kem Kem, after a rostrum discovered in 2008 was designated to this new species. This rostrum shows that its sheer size wasn't the only strange thing about this pterosaur, as situated in the middle of the rostrum are a pair of protuberances. The reasons for these structures aren't known, with multiple theories being given, such as being used for cheek support, acting as visual markers, or supporting dewlaps. The most likely theory though is that they may have been used to help process food, in particular hard food items such as shellfish, using them to crush the items in its mouth. Now, while being adapted to hard-body food items, it wasn't impossible that Elanca would feed on other prey such as smaller dinosaurs and perhaps even babies of larger ones. And trust me, there are plenty of them. For example, take the 40-foot-long, 7-tongue sauropod Rabachisaurus. This giant was named in 1954 by French paleontologist René Lavacat, from material that consisted of ribs, a shoulder blade, vertebra, humerus, and a partial pelvis. These vertebrae were of particular note, as the largest one measured close to 6 feet tall, giving this animal a sail structure in life. With its huge weight and sail, it would be hard to find any predators willing to take on a fully grown Rabachisaurus, especially considering that some size estimates put this animal as being even larger at 85 feet long and 44 tons. But in the Kem Kem, there were a handful of predators who might hedge their bets against this animal. One of these was the ever-problematic genus Deltadromeus. Originally, this genus was assigned to another genus, Bahariosaurus, whose only confirmed remains were destroyed in an air raid in Germany during World War II, where the remains were being housed. With the remaining fragmentary material left assigned to Deltadromeus, we can tell that this animal was a fast runner, with limb bones that were slender and that have similarities with other running dinosaurs like Ornithomimus. Along with this, the animal's scapulars are very broad, and based on the remains of the humerus, researchers were able to tell that this animal had relatively long arms. This weird combination of characteristics has made it hard to place within the dinosaur family tree, with it being suggested as a basal Ceratosaurus or as a member of the Carcharodontosauria. This was cleared up though in 2016 with the discovery of the genus Guaulichio from South America. A phylogenetic study was conducted by the researchers of the paper describing these remains, and it was found that not only does this genus have a close relationship with Deltadromeus, but also places these two as basal Megaraptorans, a group known for their extremely long arms. This group of dinosaurs sits within the larger family of Carcharodontosauridae, meaning Deltadromeus has a distant relationship with an animal it likely would have bumped into whilst living in the Kem Kem, the family's namesake, Carcharodontosaurus. With its name meaning shark-toothed lizard, it was named after its teeth, which were said to resemble those of great white sharks. For a while, all we had of this creature were these teeth, as they were what was originally uncovered. This lack of material made it very hard to tell what genus they belonged to, so these teeth were assigned to the genus Megalosaurus. But at the time, this genus was a wastebasket taxon, with multiple dinosaur species assigned to it. Later, these teeth were moved to the genus Dryptosaurus, before getting its own genus name in the 1930s by Ernest Stromer. Told you we'd eventually get back to him. This material was uncovered in Egypt, and much like the Deltadromeus material, it was destroyed in the same bombing raid during the 1940s. Fortunately, in 1996, paleontologist Paul Sereno uncovered a nearly complete skull, which gave us a clear picture of what this animal might have looked like. With the skull measuring around 1.5 meters, it was pretty clear this was a big predator. Based on this, the actual size of the animal was estimated as being 12 to 15 meters long and weighing upwards of 6 tons. With its sheer size and skull, Carcharodontosaurus would have been a top predator, easily capable of taking down even the large Rabachisaurus. While seeming impossible, a paper published in 2015 found that it was more than possible for it to do this. The paper set out to estimate the upper limits of the animal's weightlifting capabilities, after being inspired by the paleo titled Double Death by Bob Nicholas, which depicts two Carcharodontosauruses hoisting a young Rabachisaurus into the air, with each one holding one end of the animal. Quick side note, but I found it interesting that this artwork was inspired when Bob Nichols looked out of his window and saw two birds squabbling over a worm in a similar manner to the two dinosaurs in the picture. I mean, you could make the argument that the two dinosaurs are just big birds after all. Anyway, getting back to the paper, they estimated that Carcharodontosaurus would have been capable of hoisting 2.5 tons in the air, with the jaws alone being able to hoist 500 kilos into the air. This would have allowed it to prey on the many large fish the Kem Kem had in its rivers, as well as the aforementioned sauropod. A truly impressive pair of jaws. And it would need them as well, because along with Deltadromeus, there was another large predator in the same ecosystem. And it just so happens that it was one of the largest ever to exist. Spinosaurus aegypticus. This animal was first uncovered from the Bahariya Formation in Egypt in 1912 by Ernest Stromer, the same place where and man who discovered the material of Carcharodontosaurus around the same time. However, like most of the material from this time period, it was destroyed during Allied bombings of Munich in the 1940s. This original material consisted of some conical-shaped teeth, a slender lower jawbone, and 6-foot-tall neural spines. This weird combination of features has led some to suggest that Spinosaurus is a chimera, a fossil that is made up of multiple other fossils from different animals. This was put to an end in 2014 when Dr. Nizar Ibrahim uncovered bones belonging to Spinosaurus that all came from the same individual, that being a juvenile. It was this find that not only told us that Spinosaurus was indeed this weird looking, but also told us a lot more about how this animal looked. See, before this, it wasn't really clear how this animal looked, with it tending to be depicted as a typical theropod, with the large sail and elongated head. But even with this, it already had very strange proportions, such as an elongated torso. After Ibrahim's discovery, more details were brought to light. For a start, the snout had several small openings at the front that are similar to those found in crocodiles, which house special nerves that help in detecting vibrations or changes in pressure in the water. Alongside these, they had interlocking conical teeth, short femurs with large muscles that aided in retraction, and feet that resembled those of modern shorebirds that have webbed feet. All this painted the picture of an animal well adapted for life around water. However, in 2018, a paper was published that created a digital model of this animal that casted doubt on the aquatic idea. This paper found that Spinosaurus' skeleton was highly pneumatized, meaning there were multiple air-filled cavities within the skeleton. These cavities made the animal incredibly light, and the paper came to the conclusion that the animal was in fact too light to sink below the water and incapable of being semi-aquatic. But they do entertain the idea that it might have been a shoreline feeder. But this changed yet again in 2020 when Dr. Ibrahim reported the finding of a Spinosaur tail, and of course, it was bizarre. See, like its sail, the tail had extended caudal vertebra creating a paddle shape. Along with this, these were highly reduced. For most animals, these joints provide stability to the spine. However, with them being reduced in Spinosaurus, it means it had a much more flexible one. This gave rise to the idea that it would have used the tail to propel itself through the water in a manner similar to a crocodile. In fact, the paper tested the tail's propulsion efficiency and compared it to other theropods, along with modern crocodiles and great crested newts. It was found that the tail was more effective than the other theropods and was only just behind the modern day animals. So once again, Spinosaurus was a semi-aquatic dinosaur. But as is often the case, this idea didn't last long. Just 2 years later, a study was published that created a flesh model of Spinosaurus, and it was found that not only was it slow underwater, but it also couldn't actually right itself in the water, and once again, it was found that it couldn't actually sink underwater. Even with this, the paper does still state that indeed this dinosaur appeared to have more adaptations to being around water than any other discovered. Now, after hearing all that, the question does arise of how a place that held 2 of the largest land predators to ever exist, pterosaurs that had wingspans the same length as an average shipping container, and 8 genera of crocodilomorph, manages to exist without turning into an unstable bloodbath. Well, this apparent overabundance of large predators and lack of large herbivores has been stumping paleontologists for a long time. So much so that this phenomenon has its own name, Stromer's riddle. Now, in my research for this video, I found 2 possible explanations for this. The first is a lot more scientific based, as the Kem Kem isn't the only place where this overabundance of predators is noticed. Travel down the continent and back 20 million years from the Kem Kem, you'll arrive in what is known today as the El Haraz Formation of Niger. Here, like the Kem Kem, predators ruled the roost, with the Spinosaurid Suchomimus, the Abelisaurid Cryptops, and the confusing Carcharodontosaurus species Eocarcharius, all coexisting with one another. However, all these species share one similar feature between them: curved teeth. Now, while they didn't all have exactly the same tooth shape, with Suchomimus having a more conical shaped teeth, the curved shape led Nizar Ibrahim and colleagues in 2020 to suggest that fish played an important role in their diets. They also state that predators like Suchomimus were more adapted for fish eating than the others, who probably only ate fish sometimes, whilst being more adapted to scavenging or hunting the larger sauropods. With there being an abundance of large fish genera at both sites, this was used to explain the existence of several large predators. As I mentioned though, there is a second theory, which is more financially based than scientifically. See, a lot of the material from the Kem Kem isn't actually known as a result of expeditions uncovering the fossils from the rocks, but instead a lot of it comes from fossil collectors who sell them on. This is in fact quite a valuable trade in the area, and as a result of theropod fossils fetching higher prices, this has led to their remains being the ones most often on sale at fossil shops, which as a result paints a different picture as to the actual ecosystem of the time. Whether or not there were indeed this many predators, the actual Kem Kem formation managed to coexist for over 5 million years, but unfortunately this wasn't to be forever, as around 94 to 93 million years ago, sea levels began to rise. With the Kem Kem situated along the coast, this put it at risk to the rise in levels, and soon the Kem Kem was submerged in a shallow sea, bringing an end to one of the most fascinating paleontological sites ever. But this is far from the only interesting site discovered, and if you want me to cover another site, then please let me know in the comments below. Until next time, bye bye.